Right. So today we have Marcus Parham. He's the Assistant Director of the Career and Leadership Development Center. As a lot of you know, Marcus grew up in Kent, Ohio, and we were actually fellow 2002 graduates together, along with Randy's daughter and probably a couple other people I'm forgetting. Let me see. So he's a dual graduate of Ohio University, Gladys W. and David H. Patton College of Education, receiving an undergraduate and graduate degree in recreation and sport pedagogy. I think I said that correctly, with an emphasis in coaching education and recreation management administration. He returned to Ohio U to develop Ohio U's future leaders early, often, and forever. He is currently serving as an assistant director for the Career and Leadership Development Center and working exclusively with the human service professionals and educators. Since graduating from OU, Parham has served 2 terms for the Patton College's Dean Circle of Engagement as an advisory board member for the Dean Renee Middleton, and he also served in nonprofit administration as an executive leader with the YMCA of Central Ohio. Marcus is an active fitness enthusiast. He's a certified personal trainer. He spent 2 years leading fitness segments on Central Ohio 10 TV News. He's practiced as an agency signed fitness fashion model and has appeared in numerous publications and events such as Columbus Fashion Week. I believe he won Best Smile for our class, so that makes sense. And then also, last but not least, he's a former student athlete and a 4-year letterman with the Ohio University football team. He also has a beautiful daughter, Amaya. So Marcus.
Absolutely. Amanda, first things first, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come and speak to the fellow Rotarians. Rotarians, good afternoon. Thank you so much for giving me a part of your time this afternoon. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, but as I'm doing so, I just wanted to say thanks to James for that 100-year history. As a historian, I love hearing about history, and I do a lot of work on it here at the university. And also say congratulations to Caroline for the work that you're doing in the community. And that kind of alludes to what I want to talk about with you guys today. Is Amanda mentioned a number of my accomplishments since leaving Kent. And I thought, what better but to share a presentation? You know, as an educator, I get an opportunity to present all the time here at the university. And so, you know, please stop me if you can't see my screen. But I wanted today to discuss the thin line between success and failure. And my story growing up in Kent, growing up in Kent City schools, and really become vulnerable and get an opportunity to tell a story in efforts of really kind of providing the scope for all of you amazing professionals who get an opportunity to work with young Kent youth and provide an opportunity and a pathway for success for the youngsters. And so I'm going to give a couple of reflections throughout my presentation. I'm going to discuss, growing up, growing up in Kent, Ohio. I really want to be vulnerable with you guys, talk about some of my success, as well as some of my failures. I want to, touch base on my professional career, community development post leaving Kent, some of the university development and career aspirations that I have moving forward, even from this point. And most importantly, provide some suggestions and insight for working with youth from Kent, especially those youth that are coming from underrepresented populations. The beginning of this Rotary meeting started out discussing, students in need and providing coats for students at Kent City schools. And that warmed my heart, because I remember my unique story growing up in Kent. My story starting as a student of need. And as you can see at the bottom, you see a picture of my mother, my beautiful mother. And I can't tell my story without telling the story of my mom. And most of you guys being from Kent actually more than likely know her or who have ran into her. But my mother, as a 17-year-old became pregnant in high school, and had my older brother at 17 and myself at 19. And, she was a brilliant student, had earned a scholarship to Michigan State, and really, stopped everything that she was doing and developed her whole life and devoted her whole life to taking care of me and my brother. And so, there's a picture of my mother down at the bottom and my aunt Jackie, who actually works at the high school still. And so most of you guys know Jackie Peoples Dukes. That's a perfect example. My Aunt Jackie went on to Michigan State and now she works at the high school. But my story really starts with my mother, in a single parent home, growing up, in a broken home, in a split home. I was a split home kid. My story started in public housing on Lake Street, and then eventually by the time I was in high school, I had moved into Kent Park. My mother had gotten married. And with that story came a lot of influencers. There were a lot of multicultural influencers. And so one of the best things about growing up in Kent is the many different intersections between race, between class, and between culture. And I was able to be influenced by a lot of individuals growing up, which I'll explain, but I had those lower class experiences, growing up on Lake Street, in Heritage Knowles apartments, moving into more middle class experiences, living into Kent Parks. And that really provided for me an example of two sides of this world, success and failure. And I was really most influenced by my coaches and my teachers, which is why that I've taken the path that I've taken and I give back daily. But my story starts in Kent City schools. I was a Walls Elementary's kid, went to Davie Middle School prior to Stanton, and then I attended Roosevelt High School. I was always a good student, had amazing teachers, amazing mentors, and multiple sport accolades. We grew up in the era where students were not, or I guess you could say young student athletes weren't as specialized. We learned how to play all different sports growing up. And so, a respectable kid, typical kid that you would see growing up. I added in a picture of me and my best friend, Brian Rogers, from my last time attending a Rotary meeting in Kent, which was way back, and it had to have been March of 2002. But I was a member of Buckeye Boys State. I was an alternate to Brian Rogers, which most of you probably know, which was one of the only times, if not the only time, that I ever lost to Brian in anything, for those of you on the call. But some of my most fondest memories from from Kent City schools definitely had to, come from, attending and representing my classes on homecoming court as a freshman, and then winning as a senior, and then, earning a full athletic scholarship to OU, despite having a losing record or, not maintaining a very successful football team. With that being said, my dreams and my goals and aspirations started early. And I took this picture from this summer. This was my first grade teacher. Her and I had an opportunity to connect this summer, Mrs. Susan Johnson, longtime teacher in Kent City schools. And it was so heartfelt to me that she had saved an assignment that I had created from May of 1990. In this assignment, I had titled, "I Love My Life," as you can see right there to the right. And this kind of really reflects on my experiences growing up in Kent. And I really loved growing up in Kent, you guys. But it also kind of, really reflected on where I was and reminded me of who I was and where my thoughts were at that time growing up as a young man, in a split home, in a broken home, in public housing. And so, as usual, everything was dedicated to my mother, but when you looked at my dreams and my goals and my aspirations as a 6-year-old, I knew three things. I knew that I loved my life because I was a pretty quick at running. I was fast. I knew I was fast. If you look on the right picture, you can see I loved my life because I was a kid and I didn't have to pay bills. And I think that's unique to reflect on for all of us, you Rotarians. As a 6-year-old, I was already absorbing my mother's stress and her energy around finances, and I was already thinking about paying bills. And if you look in the picture, you can actually see I have a football that I actually drew in the picture, and there's actually like an obstacle of me with football. And the third thing that I knew is that I wanted to leave. I wanted to make my way out of Kent. I wanted to explore the world. And so, you know, that really kind of reflects on my life growing up in Kent. I loved growing up in Kent, you guys. It was an amazing experience. But again, you know, the two individuals that you see in this picture, my mother and my biological father, I have never seen in the same room to this day in my life. You know, they divorced before I was able to remember things. I was maybe, you know, a toddler, you know, and I grew up again, I want to reflect on this, in these small areas or small pockets that are everywhere, you know, around our country, but even in Kent, in areas, you know, on Lake Street and Heritage Knolls Apartments, or in Silver Meadows Boulevard, which I like to call Never Never Land. And if you look at the bottom, you know, it's that Peter Pan concept of, you know, the land of no parents, or the land of no parental supervision, you know. And I kind of want to reflect on this with you guys, because, you know, when we grew up, we had this, our own version of this Peter Pan story called Hook. And in Hook, this movie, there was this individual called Rufio, all right? And Rufio was this young man who was the leader of Never Never Land, the land where there were no adults or no parents. And this was a cute, amazing story that we used to tell. But let's be honest, Never Never Land is real, and it takes place here in American society every day. And these areas are not for play, and these areas are not safe, and they're not dangerous. And so my mother, working 2 jobs growing up as an early kid, I can always remember growing up in this large community where there were apartments around me, and there were a lack of fathers around. There was no fathers. And so, you know, we tended to guide towards the oldest kids in the neighborhood, and that may have led us down the right path or the wrong path. We may have taken some steps in the wrong direction. And, you know, I would say I was influenced by that, you know, growing up. And you know, with me being a respectable kid growing up in middle school, I never was in in-school suspension. I never made major mistakes. But I will say, when I got to high school, you know, I had my first major mistake in my life. And I had a physical altercation with another student that involved the multiple parties. And I lost my ability to attend Kent Roosevelt High School for 6 weeks at the end of my freshman year. You know, I bring up this moment in my life because it was the pivotal moment in my life to where I realized the steps or the crossroads in which I needed to change in order to become successful. You know, and I remember I spent the rest of my year at the Kent Free Library under the tutelage of Mr. Dave Smith. You know, we discussed, you know, Kent City schools. And, you know, I remember that time in my life, and I can honestly say that, you know, it was at that point that I needed to take the steps to make a change. You know, and I really started to see the differences between the intersections of race and culture, and how these things really made differences in how you were able to grow up and how you were able to be perceived growing in this world. And so with that being said, you know, I received, sorry, I have a bit of feedback. I think we might have somebody on, might need to mute. But yeah, you know, from that point, I had an opportunity to really see, as, you know, within that physical altercation, there were multiple races involved. My best friend, who was a Caucasian male, was able to return to school. I got expelled from school, and it started to allow me to see the differences in the world. I got a second chance to come back to Kent Roosevelt, and I made best of my experiences. Football saved my life. You know, I will say, you know, as Amanda mentioned, you know, I had a lot of athletic experiences, a lot of athletic success personally, you know, but my fondest memories of Kent Roosevelt High School were, you know, my students, or my fellow students, voted me as having the best personality and the best smile. And so it wasn't my athletics that my students or my peers, you know, admired me for, which I think, you know, reflecting on my years at high school were my best experiences. Outside of that, those influencers in which I had. You know, I mentioned the idea that, you know, at the top left, my real father was never there. I wasn't able to develop a relationship with him until my mid-30s. But at the top right, you will see my stepfather. And my stepfather is my hero, and probably the greatest influence that I've had in my life. not to mention the idea that he is an Italian American, second generation Italian American. And so, you know, my stepfather, growing up in Ravenna, Ohio, Mr. Frank Rock, you know, really showed me, you know, what it meant to be a man, and really led by example, you know what I'm saying, in regards to what it meant to be consistent and be hardworking. And I'll always hold him high in my hearts for that. My other influencers, my mother's brother, my uncle Jason Jones, also a graduate of Kent Roosevelt High School. And then finally, most of you know Mr. Kevin Hockett, who I would consider to be one of my most early influencers growing up. And so, you know, prior to my mother getting married, she only had one relationship, and that was with Mr. Kevin Hockett, who really provided for me the foundation of what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be an educator, taught me what it meant to kind of to grow. And so he always kind of holds true as one of those early influencers of mine. But really growing up without a father, I stole my best friend's dads, you know, and I really want you guys to reflect on that as you're growing up with some of these young men that you see growing up in Kent. But, you know, I could not be remiss not to mention the idea that my best friend's fathers were the ones that took me in, were the ones that showed me what it meant to be consistent and to be a man. And Mr. Glenn Kruger, you know, former fire chief, you know, is one of the biggest influences in my life. You know, former state trooper, Mr. Kevin Rogers, Brian Rogers' father, Mr. Gerard Stewart, and Mr. Coach Hawkins, you know, who took me out of public housing and took me to my first football game. And so, you know, the coaches were the ones that really influenced me growing up, and really were the ones that kind of provided for me an opportunity to see what it was like. And so after making mistakes and bouncing back from that, I had an opportunity to earn a scholarship, as Amanda mentioned, came to Ohio University as a first generation college student. There wasn't a lot of individuals in my family that could provide for me the foundation or the pathway on how to become successful. With that being said, football was my savior. All right. I had a great career as a backup here at Ohio University. I was, you know, happy to be able to earn a full athletic scholarship. Came to a university that did not have a lot of success initially, and we grew the program into a very successful program. You know, as a defensive backfield, you know, I had the unique opportunity to play behind an All-American and an all-conference defensive back, which led me to not having a whole lot of success outside of a role player on the football field, but really provided for me those foundations of being those transferable leadership skills of being a role player, and really taking on responsibilities, and had a great opportunity to grow here at Ohio University under the tutelage of Coach Frank Solich. And so, as you can see, my career, you know, lasted about 44 games here at a Division I level. I had some relative success on the football field, but I think what I'm most important and most proud of is the idea that we were able to attend a bowl game for the first time since 1968. And really start to build the program back up as being a successful one under an amazing and legendary coach. And if I didn't have any success on the field, I definitely got it right in the classroom. And so, you know, I really started to focus on academics and becoming the best person I could be, and started to thinking about my future as a coach, or providing an opportunity becoming a coach. And that takes me to one of my next greatest influencers, legendary Coach Frank Solich, who's still here to this day. He's been here for 15 years, the most winningest coach at MAC history. He formally taught me how to be a football coach. I learned and I watched, and my foundation was in coaching and scouting. I'm still a coach in the classroom. With that being said, my first experiences landed me in the NFL as a player personnel scout. As a scout, I didn't have the opportunity to really be hands-on with players and evaluate. I hated it. And, you know, I really wanted to be a coach. And so, you know, I left my experiences in the NFL, which was an amazing experience. We won an NFC North championship in Minnesota with the Vikings. Might I mention that Coach Kevin Stefanski was there with me. We were together as young coaches on the staff. I was a scout and he was the young coach on the staff. But great relationships, great times. And then when I had my daughter, left the NFL, I really started to develop my career as a lifelong learner and a leader in the community. I really didn't see the value in devoting my whole life to football players and not being able to be a great father, and completely took a life turn, started working in the community, giving back, telling my story every day, developing other young individuals, which takes me to my real passion, which is giving back to the youth, um, and providing opportunities for others who had a rough start like I did. And so I spent about 5 to 10 years in Central Ohio, giving back in every way that I could and providing pathways through education and through the YMCA, fitness, etc. Continued with my service leadership, and always stayed connected here at Ohio University. I served on the Board of Education, or the College Board, for two services, like Amanda mentioned. I love Ohio University. It was my opportunity out. From there, the YMCA sent me to 10 TV News for one opportunity, and 10 TV loved me. I ended up spending 2 years with them on the news doing fitness segments. It was like a terrible television sitcom. I was like a poor man's Billy Blanks, doing fitness segments very early in the morning, but it was an amazing experience. You can see me here with fellow Kent State graduate Karina Nova, great friend of mine. And that just continued to open up to more opportunities for modeling and television experiences. And so I've lived an amazing life from those foundations, just working, and starting there in Kent City schools, doing some print modeling, doing some runway stuff, doing some things in fitness, that has really allowed me to just kind of expand in a number of different career, directions. But my influencers nowadays, are really, those individuals that have helped me along my career path, the CEOs, the professors, the dean of the college, my former coaches, my former professors are those individuals that have really provided for me that path to be where I'm at now. I returned to Ohio University in 2018 and have had great success since I've been back. As you can see in the picture in the far right, I do a lot of work with our football team still, and you can see my mentor, Coach Solich, back there, kind of overseeing me as I'm talking to the team. And I have an opportunity to not only work here at the university, but to take some of my passions with, moonlighting and doing some modeling to work at the university as well. And so, if I can leave, Rotary with one thing, it's, when we're thinking about those kids that we're working with in Kent City schools, those kids that may need coats, are those kids that, may, show, deviant activities. I really want you guys to remember that, they may not have the same perspective, but there's a lot of potential in every single one of those young kids that we get an opportunity to work with. And so listening first, embracing their culture, remembering the idea that students are, our young kids in Kent are growing up, in Silver Meadows, and growing up on Lake Street and on the South End, maybe growing up in fatherless environments. They might grow up in a neighborhood of fatherless environments, and so be cognizant of how they respond to fear and anger, provide that attention, always continue to involve them in as many activities that you can, and provide that authentic support and mentorship. What's next for me? I'm a PhD student here at the university. I teach Rec 4100, so I actually teach and Rec 4900. I teach for the program that I actually graduated from. I do education, I do workshops, clinics, training, development. My goals in the future, I want to be a full-time professor. I don't want to just work as an adjunct. I want to continue to do life coaching and consulting, personal training, and working with players in development. And so thank you guys so much for giving me this opportunity to kind of come and share my story with you today. And it means so much to see some of those individuals that were with me along the journey, and just really, really know, like Amanda, authentically know some of my challenges and some of my successes growing up in Kent, Ohio. And so, I did want to provide that for you and just provide a chance for some questions, and for individuals to ask.
Thank you very much, Markham, for that amazing and inspiring life story. Any questions for Marcus at this point?
Marcus?
Lang, go ahead. You're muted, Lang.
Mr. Kennedy, I do believe you are muted. Or you're mute.
There. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Marcus, outstanding presentation. And I'm curious, you played football at OU. Was that when Coach Solich was first arriving at OU?
Thank you for asking the question. First things first, Mr. Kennedy. And no, actually, I attended Ohio University in the fall of 2002 under a coach by the name of Brian Knorr, who came from the Air Force. And so I was able to, Coach Solich came to Ohio University in 2004, which was my redshirt sophomore season. And so I spent my final junior and senior season under the leadership of Coach Solich, which really provided for me, I guess you can see the difference between success and failure. In high school, we were 2-8 as a sophomore. I was 2-8 as a junior, or I only won 2 games as a junior and as a senior. And then, you know, coming to Ohio University, we lost 12 games during our first season. And so I really, you know, was interested in learning, you know, what were the intricate details in becoming successful as a coach. And I've kind of relayed that into my professional career.
I was the athletic director at Kent State for a number of years. And I recall a very interesting time when Coach Solich first came to OU. And so I'm pretty sure I saw you play against Kent State a couple times.
Absolutely.
I hold Coach Solich very, very high. I think he's one of the outstanding coaches, more than a coach. He's a lifetime coach. And so I just appreciated that part of your journey.
I appreciate that, Mr. Kennedy. And he wrote a letter of recommendation for me to get into graduate school and has been there for me to provide opportunities for me along my journey. And I admire him greatly.
Marcus, Carol Creamy here. First, I loved hearing your story. Thanks so much for sharing it with us. I am wondering if you think your life would have turned out differently had you not been expelled from high school.
Carol, thank you so much for that question. And to allow me to reflect on that, I would say absolutely my life would have ended up differently if I would not have been expelled from high school. I would say that it was at that moment in my life when I hold my mother so highly, Carol. I've seen her struggle from the moment that we were young, that I sat across from our administration and they explained to her that they didn't feel that I was safe to be around the rest of the population, that I really realized that there was never going to be a time in my life where anybody was going to be able to draw a story, or I wasn't going to allow myself to act in a manner to allow anybody to draw a conclusion about myself that allowed them to reflect on myself or my mother or my family poorly. And so definitely would have ended up different. There were a number of other incidents that happened, some positive, some negative, but that was a pivotal moment and a turning point in my life, for sure.
Marcus, Mary Beth Harper.
Hi, Mary
I
Beth.
just bring you greetings from Sam and Will Harper, who, yes.
My guys, absolutely.
Yeah,
please send them. Please send them.
I will. Yeah, I told him you were our speaker today, and you and Sam were on the track team together, and you and Will were on the football team together.
Yes, we were.
Yes, that was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun, and I remember those 400s. And I was not a fan of track. As you can see, there wasn't a whole lot about track in there, but I did have some running around that track circle. And so
that's right.
Said hello. Please tell
me.
I
will.
Marcus, Chaz Madonio here. Just curious, were you recruited by Kent State at all?
Yes, I was, Chaz. Actually, I was recruited by an individual at Kent State who led on and became a longtime coach at Ohio State, and is still around and doing a lot of work in the area of football. Forgive me for not remembering his name directly off the top of my head, but I definitely
Tony Alford?
No, Coach Alfred is a good friend and a member of the community, but it was not Coach Alfred who recruited me.
Marcus, I have a question. What do you think we can do specifically to help the underserved females in our community? You know, I feel like sometimes they get overlooked even more so, and we need to prevent them from being in situations where they are the single parent. So what can we do for them?
Absolutely. I think for myself, early on support and mentorship, I think having those conversations in regards to, you know, support, in regards to mentorship need to take place even, you know, as early as Stanton or even in the elementary schools, in regards to having serious and authentic conversations in regards to what's happening in the household. And I think that starts with listening first, Amanda. You know what I mean?
Sure.
In regards to just providing an opportunity in a space for our young students to really open up and explain what's going on in their household. I will say one of the things that I really reflected on during my time working in Columbus City schools was how many times I had an opportunity to talk to a young man or a young woman who were maybe in 11th or 12th grade, who had never had a conversation with a teacher and educator, where they simply sat down and asked that student, so tell me what's going on at home. How are you doing? How's everything going on at home today? Did you eat something this morning before you came? You know, and so we would see, you know, these waves of students that would get in trouble. I worked in a juvenile justice program at one point in Columbus City. And we would just see these waves of students that would come off the bus and they would just go directly into suspension issues. And a lot of it just had to do with their environment and not having those conversations to see what were some of those fundamental needs and things that were missing at home, or some of the things that they were experiencing in their lives. And that's why I told my story and my journey with like that Rufio effect, because my mom worked 2 jobs. I mean, she worked at Parker Hannafin. She worked at, a lot of you guys might remember from Home Savings. She worked at Home Savings for a number of years. But, you know, then she would go and work at Kent State as a cashier in the bookstore in the evenings. And so that left, you know, my brother and myself to kind of be out in the neighborhood fending for ourselves along with the rest of the neighborhood. And things, you know, good, bad, and different happened during that time.
I think that's important because it doesn't always have to be this grand gesture. You can just say, how are you doing?
Yes. Did you eat something this morning? You know, what's going on? You know, thank you. I agree, Amanda.
Okay,
Hey, Marcus.
Okay, Marcus, as you heard earlier, we always have a custom of someone responding to the program. I hope we have a few minutes. You may hang around after this and answer any other questions that come up. But at this point in time, we're going to have Marcus Wright give that response. Marcus?
Yep. Well, first of all, thank you, Marcus. Sorry for the background noise. My little man is having a great time over there. But I appreciate the response. I appreciate you being here today. Just to give a short synopsis, when I was a kid, my cousin Edward Kendrick used to play with Marcus. So me and my grandfather would go to a lot of those games, drive to Barberton, Hoban, and all different places. But I used to watch Marcus, and I was always amazed about, you know, him on the football field, being a former player myself. But as I reflect on watching him as an athlete, it makes sense why he's in the position he is today. So I just want to give, obviously, first off, you know, on your journey and going through what you went through, a lot of respect, because it's not easy in a lot of those situations. And I found myself in a lot of those situations. Luckily, I did have a strong father figure in my life, you know, just off growing up, my father, Robert Wright. But it's easy to go left or right. And as a young kid, to make those decisions and not put yourself in detrimental positions, it is tough. So I'll give kudos to you on that. We share a lot of mentors, obviously Kevin Hawkett, Mr. Smith. He told me to tell you, he said hello next time I saw you. So he got over COVID earlier this year. So he sends his hellos. But I just have a couple of questions, if that's okay. in terms of mentorship, how do you find that significance of being a mentor or having those mentors in your journey?
How did I find them? Great listening, Marcus. I was always a good listener. I listened to everybody. I listened to the good advice. I listened to the bad advice. Uniquely growing up, like I said, one of my biggest influencers was my mother's brother, my uncle Jason. Jason Jones was a Roosevelt great football player, record holding, interception. And I really kind of, took everything he said for gospel, but he, I'm going to be honest with you, he wasn't always the most positive of role models. You know what I mean? And so I found myself, I guess you can say, absorbing advice from everybody. I found my mentors by listening even to those individuals that I guess you could say, were there to scold me, those individuals that were there to support me, and absorbed everything.
Yep. And that's kind of, the path I've taken as well. I know, we're on short time, but like I said, first and foremost, I hope that you can be around as much as you have been. I recently taken over the Kent Pee Wee football, so I would love to have you come up and talk and speak. But our society, our neighborhood of Kent appreciates the path you've taken and what you figured out about your own journey. And to Amanda's point about how we can help the kids, I just think a lot of role models like yourself and, the way that I'm heading, just need to be around. So I'm looking forward to, partnering with you on a few things and seeing you more around. But I appreciate your story because, obviously our age gap, I didn't know it, but I kind of seen the struggles as you go through life. So I appreciate what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing, and congratulations on all your success at this point.
Marcus, thank you so much. You are a lighthouse for this community, and I can't tell you how much of an inspiration you are to an individual like myself. Just providing that same pathway that your father provided, and continuing on with that legacy. And so I can't wait to work with you. You already know. Can't wait.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Marcus Wright, for that response, and so much for Marcus for being here with us and sharing your story again today. I'm going to officially end the meeting, but as I say, if people want to hang around and ask Marcus any further questions, please feel free to do